Willow wants the investigation reopened, and everyone around her thinks she has lost her mind. Let us start with Willow because what she is doing right now is the kind of thing that makes the people watching at home actually talk back to the television. Because there are moments in a soap opera when a character makes a choice so spectacularly self-destructive that it becomes almost impossible to believe they are real, and yet you cannot look away because the collision course is so perfectly, terrifyingly constructed. Willow shot Drew. Twice. She has been acquitted of that crime. She walked out of a courtroom with the legal protection of a not guilty verdict and the practical protection of double jeopardy, meaning no matter what emerges, no matter what anyone finds out, she cannot be put on trial for shooting Drew again. That is an extraordinary shield. That is a gift that most people who do terrible things never receive. The rational response to having that shield is to be very quiet, to be very grateful, and to never do anything that draws attention back to the crime it protects you from. Willow is doing the opposite of that. She wants the investigation into Drew's shooting reopened. She wants Michael looked at. She wants the police, specifically Anna, to turn their attention back to that night on the pier and the question of who pulled the trigger, with the goal of landing Michael in a cell for a crime he did not commit. Let that sink in. Willow was the shooter. Willow knows she was the shooter. And Willow is now actively working to have an innocent man convicted of the crime she committed. The logic she is operating from, and it is the logic of someone whose ego and need for control have overridden every other function, is that the acquittal alone is not enough. People still wonder. People still look at her sideways. The doubt that lingers around a not guilty verdict, especially one that came with this much surrounding drama, is something Willow cannot tolerate. If Michael is convicted, the public narrative shifts entirely. He becomes the shooter in the court of public opinion. She becomes the wrongly accused victim who endured a legal ordeal because of someone else's crime. The picture-perfect image she is obsessed with constructing gets its final, definitive frame. But to execute this, she needs Anna. And here is where Willow's plan crosses from reckless into genuinely unhinged. She is planning to use her political influence as a congresswoman to pressure Anna, to essentially threaten the funding of the Port Charles Police Department through federal channels if Anna does not pursue this investigation in the direction Willow wants it to go. She is going to threaten a law enforcement commissioner with the budget of her own department, to reopen an investigation into a crime that Willow committed, to frame an innocent man. Nina and Liesl both told her to leave this alone. In uncharacteristically aligned fashion, two women who do not always agree on anything were completely united in their message to Willow. You got away with it. Stop talking about it. Move on with your life before you give someone a reason to look more closely at something that already has your fingerprints all over it. Liesl specifically said something that Willow would be very wise to sit with. Being acquitted and being exonerated are not the same thing. An acquittal means the jury did not find sufficient proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It does not mean the truth has been established. It does not mean the investigation is closed in any permanent sense. It does not mean that new evidence, if it surfaces, cannot be acted upon in other ways. Civil proceedings, professional consequences, the destruction of the public image Willow is so desperate to protect. Willow apparently did not absorb this distinction. Brennan may end up joining the scheme. That possibility is genuinely alarming because Brennan has resources and connections that Willow alone simply does not have access to. If Brennan and Willow conspire to construct a case against Michael, to manufacture or manipulate evidence pointing to him as the shooter, the damage they could do before anyone realizes what is happening is significant. Michael could find himself facing something that feels legitimate from the outside, backed by the credibility of a WSB chief and the political leverage of a sitting congresswoman, before anyone in his corner has time to properly respond. But here is what history teaches us about schemes built on this many layers of wrongness. They tend to collapse. Not always quickly, not always cleanly. But the more complicated the construction, the more failure points it contains. And Willow adding new crimes to the pile she is already sitting on while simultaneously trying to draw official attention to the original crime she committed is the kind of structural instability that does not hold. The irony that could ultimately destroy Willow is sitting right at the center of her own plan. She wants the investigation reopened. An investigation that gets reopened generates attention. Attention generates questions. Questions generate witnesses. And there are witnesses, Trina and Kai, who know exactly what happened that night and have been sitting with that knowledge trying to decide what to do with it. If Willow hands them a moment where coming forward feels not just morally right but practically necessary, she may find that the very investigation she pushed for is the one that finally surfaces what she has been desperate to bury. Liesel told her to stop. Nina told her to stop. The entire logic of self-preservation told her to stop. Willow is not stopping. Port Charles should be very nervous about what comes next. Sunny's heart, Tristan's scalpel, and the crisis that changes everything. Now let us talk about Sunny, because the health storyline that has been quietly gestating in the background of this summer is now moving toward the foreground. And when Sunny's physical vulnerability becomes the center of attention, every relationship around him gets tested in ways that reveal things people were not quite ready to reveal. Tristan arrived in Port Charles as a cardiac surgeon. That is a specific specialty. The show did not make him a general practitioner or an emergency physician. They made him a heart surgeon. In the language of soap opera storytelling, a cardiac surgeon who has been introduced without yet having a significant medical story to carry is a cardiac surgeon who is waiting for the right patient to arrive on his operating table. That patient is almost certainly Sunny. Sunny has had heart issues before. His health is not the uncomplicated thing that his physical presence and his commanding energy suggest it is. And this summer, with the mob boss finally returning to something that resembles his full operational self, the timing for a health crisis that strips away that commanding exterior and reminds everyone around him of his mortality could not be more dramatically loaded. Here is what a Sunny health emergency does to the landscape around him. Justine has been in an extraordinarily complicated position relative to Sunny all summer, drawn to him in ways that her professional role makes deeply problematic, maintaining a careful distance that is costing her more than she has been willing to acknowledge out loud. Almost losing Sunny is the kind of event that collapses the careful distance people maintain around feelings they are not ready to admit. If Sunny is on that operating table and Justine is standing in that hospital corridor facing the real possibility of a world without him, whatever she has been holding back about how she feels is going to become very difficult to keep holding. That love confession, or something that functions like one, could change the entire dynamic of that relationship and every relationship adjacent to it. Carly is the other variable that Sunny's health crisis activates. Carly and Sunny have a history that no other relationship in either of their lives can quite match. They have been married multiple times. They have been through things that would have broken anyone who is not the specific people they are. The connection between them is not romantic in the way it once was. Carly is with Valentine, Sunny has been moving in other directions, but it is also not nothing. It is never nothing with those two. And there is still that flash drive, sitting in a kitchen drawer, waiting for Jocelyn to find it or for Carly to decide she is ready to look at it or for some other event to force the contents into the open. The flash drive is a ticking element. Whatever is on it, Brick believed it would change Carly's feelings about Valentine. Sunny's health crisis may be the event that creates enough emotional disruption in Carly's life that the flash drive finally gets opened, either by Carly herself or by Jocelyn at exactly the wrong or right moment. If Carly's relationship with Valentine fractures and Sunny is simultaneously at his most vulnerable, the possibility of those two finding their way back toward each other is not something that can be dismissed. It is the kind of development that has happened before between them, that has its own internal logic based on decades of shared history, and that would send immediate ripple effects through every relationship in their orbit. But the most urgent and most immediate consequence of Sunny's heart emergency is what it does to Jason. Jason has made a declaration. He cannot kill for Sunny anymore. He is done with that part of the life. Whatever his loyalty to Sunny, whatever their history, whatever the weight of everything they have been through together, that specific thing, the killing, is something Jason has decided he can no longer do. And that decision came out of everything he went through in captivity, the trauma that rewired his relationship to violence and consequences, and who he is on the other side of the things he has done. But what if Sunny becoming vulnerable is the direct result of Jason leaving? What if pulling back from the protective role, the role that kept certain threats away from Sunny, because the threat of Jason's response was itself a deterrent, created the opening for an attack that leaves Sunny fighting for his life? Jason blaming himself for Sunny's situation is entirely consistent with who he is. He would not be able to not blame himself. And a Jason who believes his choice left Sunny exposed is a Jason who feels obligated to fix it, regardless of what that fixing requires. Even if it means stepping back into the life he just stepped out of. Even if it means doing the thing he said he could not do anymore. Even temporarily. Even just long enough for Sunny to be safe. That is the trap. The one that the life always sets for the people who try to leave it. It does not chase you. It simply waits for the moment when someone you love needs you, and the only way to help them is to come back. Tristan saving Sunny's life on that operating table would be the moment that makes Tristan real to this town in a way that his quiet presence at the hospital has not yet achieved. It would also deepen whatever is developing between Tristan and Britt, because nothing creates a bond quite like watching someone save a life in front of you. And it would force the Jack-Tristan question into a new context, because if Tristan performs emergency surgery on one of Port Charles's most significant figures, Jack's relationship to him is going to be impossible to keep in the background.